No naval officer in World War II ever trained for this moment. A German U-boat, damaged, cornered, trying to run, struggling on the surface. A U.S. Coast Guard cutter, alone, closing fast through sleet and black Atlantic water. And a commander who had seconds to choose between the rules of the sea or the survival of his convoy. On the night of February 22nd, 1943, Commander James A. Hirschfield stood on the bridge of USCGC Campbell, staring at the shape of U-606 as it limped through the waves. The Atlantic was a graveyard that winter. Convoy on 166 had already lost ships. 19 more U-boats were in the hunt. Every escort commander knew the doctrine by heart. Never ram a submarine. Never risk your ship. Never trade one escort for one kill. A damaged cutter meant a defenseless convoy. A defenseless convoy meant hundreds dead. But doctrine didn't account for what Hirschfield saw through his binoculars. A U-boat desperately trying to dive again. A U-boat that could still kill. Radar said Campbell was closing at 18 knots. Report said U-606 was seconds away from slipping under. And in that moment, Hirschfield made a choice no one expected. Hard to starboard. Full speed. We're ramming her. Officers froze. Helmsman hesitated. Every manual said this was suicide. A collision that could tear open Campbell's hull like a tin can. But Hirschfield didn't blink. The cutter lurched. The bow rose. Steel screamed against steel as Campbell smashed into U-606 with a shockwave so violent it threw men off their feet. The German submarine reeled, crippled, but in the chaos, something else tore, something far worse. A submerged bow plane of the U-boat knifed into Campbell's side, carving a 15-foot gash deep below the waterline. Cold seawater surged in. Lights flickered. Engines shuddered. The ramming had worked, but the price had only just begun to reveal itself. Engine room flooding. Generators going offline. We're losing power. And in the darkness, the crew realized the unthinkable. The Hunter was now sinking too. The Atlantic swallowed sound differently that night. Every crash of water, every shudder of steel echoed through USCGC Campbell like the heartbeat of a wounded giant. As the ramming impact faded, the reality came sharply into focus. The engine room, the cutter's lungs, was flooding fast. Chief engineers fought knee-deep in seawater, trying to isolate ruptured compartments, but the damage was catastrophic. Salt water poured through a 15-foot, jagged tear punched 3 feet below the waterline. Pumps whined, sputtered, then died as the generators shorted out one by one. No power, no engines, no lights. Campbell was adrift, 800 miles from the nearest friendly shore. And Commander James A. Hirschfield, blood running down his face from shrapnel wounds he refused to acknowledge, stood gripping the bridge rail with white knuckles. He'd taken out U-606, but now his own ship was in danger of joining her. Below decks, a waterlogged silence broke with the voice of Chief Engineer O'Leary. We're not stopping the flooding. Collision mat won't hold. The crew tried everything. Collision mats, wooden shoring, canvas plugging, even stuffing hammocks and clothing into the breach. Nothing slowed the Atlantic. Above them, the all-black gun 4 crew, under Chief Steward Lewis Etheridge, kept watch. Minutes earlier, they had fired every shell they could into the U-boat, tracking muzzle flashes through sleet and smoke. Now Etheridge's men pivoted instantly from gunnery to damage control, hauling hoses, dragging pumps, forming bucket brigades. Men passed cold seawater hand to hand in the dark, their breath freezing in the February air. Every bucket they tossed overboard was just a drop against the ocean. Campbell's executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Kessler, stepped onto the bridge, face tight with the weight of what he had to ask. "Commander, do we prepare to abandon ship?" Hirschfield didn't answer right away. The ship lurched under another wave, its bow rising sluggishly, heavier than it had been minutes earlier. His eyes remained fixed on the black void ahead. The convoy lights faint in the distance, merchantmen relying on him to keep the wolf pack from tearing them apart. Finally, he spoke. Not yet. 2 words. Not defiant. Not reckless. Just steady. focused, unbreakable. The crew returned to the impossible fight. They didn't know that 19 more U-boats still shadowed the convoy, or that no tug could reach them for days, or that without engines, Campbell couldn't maneuver, couldn't evade, couldn't even aim her guns properly. All they knew was this: the ship was dying, and the night wasn't done with them yet. Campbell drifted like a wounded animal, rolling broadside to the swell. Every wave slapped the hull with the dull, heavy thud of a death sentence being repeated. The cutter had lost propulsion, steering, and most of her electrical power. Worse, she had lost the one thing every escort ship needed in a Wolfpack fight: mobility. Without engines, Campbell could no longer dodge torpedoes, could no longer shield a convoy, could no longer run. And somewhere out in the black winter sea, Wolfpack Hodgin knew it. Radio intercept from earlier in the night made one thing clear: the Germans had dozens of positions on the convoy, and now, after hearing gunfire and ramming, they would know Campbell was crippled. A disabled escort was a prize. A helpless cutter was an easy kill. On the bridge, lookouts scanned relentlessly, eyes stinging from sleet as they searched for the faintest silhouette of a U-boat conning tower. Every minute felt like waiting for a torpedo that might already be on its way. Down in the shattered engine room, the situation deteriorated. The water had risen another foot. Fuel lines hissed as seawater mixed with oil. Men on the bucket brigades were slowing, hands raw, arms numb, knuckles bleeding from slamming buckets against twisted steel. And still, Commander Hirschfield refused the order no one wanted to give: abandon ship. "Sir," Kessler said quietly, "if a U-boat finds us like this..." "It won't," Hirschfield cut in. His voice was calm, but his jaw was locked tight. "Not while I still have a crew who can fight." He meant it. Even if Campbell couldn't move, she could still shoot. Above, Gun 4, the all-black crew, led by Chief Steward Lewis Etheridge, remained at their station. Their gun was frozen, nearly useless without electrical power, but the men stayed anyway. They scanned the sea through icy fog, waiting for the flash of a torpedo wake or the glint of moonlight on a periscope. Then a call cut through the night. "Contact, bearing 045, possible periscope." The ship erupted into motion. Etheridge's men swung their gun by hand, muscles straining, every rotation a battle against the cold and the ship's listing deck. But before they could fire, the sea went silent again. No wake, no shadow, no silhouette. Was a U-boat scouting? A wave crest mistaken for danger? Or an enemy lining up the perfect shot? No one knew. They only knew the convoy was disappearing into the distance, leaving Campbell alone in the dark, unable to follow, unable to fight the way she was built to fight. And unless something changed soon, Campbell wouldn't last another hour. The night deepened, thick with sleet and the groan of overstressed steel. Water continued to rise in the engine room, sloshing against the bulkheads as the ship listed farther to starboard. Every man on Campbell felt the shift, the subtle but unmistakable indication that the ship was losing the fight against the Atlantic. Chief Engineer O'Leary climbed up to the main deck, soaked to the bone, his face gray with exhaustion. He found Commander Hirschfield on the bridge, leaning over a chart illuminated only by a flickering battle lantern. "Sir, we can't hold it," O'Leary said. "We're patching a wound the sea doesn't want patched." Hirschfield didn't look up. "How long?" "Hours if we're lucky. Less if the weather worsens." It was already worsening. Waves smashed over the bow now, ripping away anything not bolted down. Ropes, buckets, loose tools, all swept into blackness. The deck crew lashed themselves to railings to stay upright as wind tore at their coats like claws. But Campbell's crew refused to quit. A party of machinists, mates, and seamen went back into the flooding engine room with a new, desperate plan: build internal shoring. They scavenged beams, doors, bunks, anything that could be hammered into place to brace the compromised bulkhead. Working chest deep in freezing water, they slammed timbers into position, each blow echoing like a heartbeat through the hull. Above them, Etheridge's Gun 4 crew took turns hauling makeshift pumps. Hand-cranked, Jury-rigged, unreliable, but better than nothing. Their muscles burned. Their hands shook from cold. But they kept going, because if Campbell sank, they all sank. The executive officer, Kessler, came to the bridge again. "A tug has departed from Argentia," he said, "but at towing speed, 4 days minimum." For days, Hirschfield finally stepped away from the chart and stared out at the black, heaving sea. The cutter was still taking on water, still dead in the water, still a sitting target, and now the convoy was gone. Its dim lights vanished beyond the storm. Campbell was alone with the wolf pack. Then, from the lookout, green flare in the water, survivors off the port bow. The ramming had not only crippled Campbell, it had also thrown men from U-606 into the freezing Atlantic. German sailors, enemies, drowning. Without hesitation, Hirschfield gave the only order he could live with: launch the rescue boats. His own ship was dying beneath his feet, and he was sending men into icy seas to save the very crew who had tried to kill them. It was a decision no manual covered, a decision no doctrine supported, a decision that would push Campbell even closer to disaster. The order to launch rescue boats stunned some of the younger crewmen, but only for a heartbeat. Training taught them to hate the U-boat menace. The Atlantic War was personal. Convoys burned. Friends vanished without a trace. Yet none of that mattered now. Men were drowning. 2 surf boats splashed into the black water, each loaded with Coast Guards men wearing life belts, lanterns, and lines tied around their waists in case the sea tried to claim them too. The waves tossed the small craft like toys. Each oar stroke was a fight against the storm. On the bridge, Commander Hirschfield leaned forward, eyes fixed on the rescue party as sleet stung his face and mixed with the dried blood along his temple. "Keep a light on them," he ordered. "We lose sight of those boats. We lose those men." Far off, a faint cry carried across the wind. The Germans were out there, clinging to debris, scattered by the impact that had shattered their submarine's forward hull. Some were unconscious, drifting. Others waved weakly, too cold even to shout. One of Campbell's rescue boats reached the first survivor, a young German sailor barely 20. His fingers were curled rigidly around a floating plank. The Coast Guardsman who hauled him aboard had to pry his hands loose. "He's hypothermic," the coxswain shouted. "Get him under blankets." Another boat spotted more survivors, and then more. Campbell was now caring for the enemy, while Campbell herself was sinking. On the main deck, Etheridge and his gun 4 men formed a receiving line, lifting shivering German sailors from the boats, wrapping them in wool blankets, and rushing them below for medical care. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. These were the same men whose torpedoes had stalked the convoy for days. The same men whose U-boat had nearly killed Campbell moments earlier. And now, the cutter's own crew was fighting the sea to save them. Throughout it all, the Atlantic punished the ship relentlessly. The deck pitched steeply as the list worsened. The internal shoring in the engine room groaned under new pressure. O'Leary shouted for more timber, more hands, more time the ship didn't have. Still, the rescue continued. By the time the last German survivor was pulled aboard, Campbell had saved 36 men from U-606. They were given blankets, coffee, and the same care any American sailor would receive. The rescue boats returned, battered by the storm, their crews exhausted and freezing. Hirschfield watched them climb back aboard and counted every head. All present. He exhaled, a long, shaky breath he didn't let anyone see. They had saved the enemy, but now the cost of that humanity became clear. Those precious hours spent saving lives meant Campbell was even farther from help, even weaker, even more damaged, and the wolf pack was still out there. Night swallowed the island again, thick and breathless, the kind of darkness that pressed against the radar shack walls like a living thing. Major Carroll Smith leaned over the glowing screen, its green sweep cutting arcs across his face, etching worry into sharp relief. Outside, the Pacific hissed in the wind, low and anxious, as if it too sensed what was coming. The Japanese weren't giving up. Not after last night's failed bombing run. Not after losing aircraft to a weapon they couldn't see, couldn't hear, and couldn't believe existed. Pride is fuel in war, sometimes deadlier than bombs. And tonight, Tokyo sent a message of its own. A larger raid, faster aircraft, new approach routes. Smith saw it before anyone else. Faint specks on the screen, barely perceptible. They were flying low, skimming the ocean's surface, trying to slip under the radar lobe. Someone on the other side had learned from yesterday. Good. So had Smith. He adjusted the gain, brought the clutter into view, and the surface noise crackled. Waves, wind, chaos. Hidden inside that chaos movement. Pattern. Intent. Then he had them. Raid approaching from bearing 047, he said calmly, but his voice carried that undertone his men recognized. A razor-sharp edge wrapped in steel discipline. Low altitude. Very low. They think they're invisible. The air defense officer stared at the scope, eyes widening. How did you even? Watch the rhythm, Smith murmured, fingers tapping the glass. Real waves don't keep time that well. Outside, searchlights remained dark. The gunners stood ready but blind in the night. And somewhere above the Black Sea, Japanese pilots raced toward them, believing they were ghosts. Smith began vectoring fighters before the enemy even realized they'd been detected. The small American detachment scrambled into the sky, their engines clawing upward through the darkness. They trusted him, completely, blindly, and with good reason. He had never been wrong. On the screen, the specks shifted formation, one of them breaking away. Smith's eyes narrowed. Decoy, he whispered. They're trying to split our fighters. But he didn't bite. He rode the radar's sweep like a conductor, directing the intercept with quiet precision, drawing invisible lines in the sky that American pilots followed as faithfully as runway lights. Then, another shift. The enemy was climbing. Brace, Smith said. They're going over the ridge for a high-angle dive. This was new, dangerous, desperate. The shack vibrated as distant engines roared overhead, the island waking to the approaching storm. Smith didn't hesitate. Turn into them, he ordered his fighters. Don't wait for visual. You'll see them at the last second. The radio crackled, confused replies, hesitation. He pushed harder, voice firm. They're counting on the dark. Don't give them what they want. The two formations hurtled toward each other, three-dimensional chess in a pitch-black sky. And then, contact. Tracer fires split the night. Explosions bloomed over the ocean, momentary suns revealing silhouettes of death locked in violent embrace. The Japanese raid collapsed in seconds. The few survivors fled into the emptiness they came from. Silence settled. Only the radar hummed. Smith exhaled slowly, shoulders sinking, exhaustion creeping through his bones. He had turned darkness into a weapon again. But the war wasn't done with him. Not even close. Dawn crept over the island in bruised colors. Purple, orange, a tired gray that made the bomb craters look deeper than they were. The air smelled of burned aviation fuel and wet earth. Men spoke in low voices, their steps heavy, their nerves still trembling from the night's chaos. Major Carroll Smith hadn't slept. He stood outside the radar shack, hands on his hips, staring at the calm horizon with the hollow eyes of someone who had spent the night inside the beating heart of a storm. But the storm had passed. And with it, something else had changed, something he felt but hadn't yet seen. Footsteps approached behind him. Colonel Harrington, the island's commanding officer, stopped a few feet away. The man looked different this morning, less stubborn, less skeptical, as though the night had hammered the edges off him. Major, he said, clearing his throat. I owe you something. Smith didn't turn. You don't owe me anything, sir. But Harrington shook his head. You saved this island twice in one night, he said quietly. Hell, maybe saved half the Pacific. He paused, searching for the right words. I've misjudged you. Misjudged radar. That ends today. Smith finally looked over. The colonel's face was drawn, serious, humbled in a way Smith had never seen. Sir, Smith began, my crew. Your crew, Harrington interrupted, deserves medals. And you deserve whatever resources you need. Radar stations, dedicated defense lines, more operators, more screens, whatever you say, we do. Effective immediately. Smith blinked. Slowly. Men had doubted him for months. Doubted the technology. Doubted the invisible. Last night shattered every doubt. Permission to speak freely? Smith asked. Harrington nodded. I don't want recognition, Smith said. I want preparation. The Japanese will adapt again. They always do. Harrington exhaled. Then we'll adapt faster. The colonel motioned for him to follow. They walked toward the command center where officers awaited. Maps laid out, radios buzzing, tension thick. But this time, something new hung in the air. Respect. Every head turned as Smith entered. Officers who once ignored him now straightened in their chairs. Some saluted, awkwardly at first, because it felt strange saluting a man whose authority came from a flickering green screen rather than stripes or medals. Yet they saluted anyway, because they had seen what radar could do. Smith approached the table. We'll need to recalibrate the sweep to detect low-altitude runs. They tried masking themselves in ocean clutter. It almost worked. The operations officer scribbled notes rapidly. And we need a secondary station on the ridge, Smith continued. Elevation will help track overfly maneuvers. More nods. Serious, committed. Harrington leaned in. From now on, Major, you're not just running radar. Smith raised an eyebrow. You're planning our whole night defense doctrine. Silence followed. Heavy. Meaningful. Smith nodded slowly. Then let's get to work. The men gathered around him, listening, really listening, as he outlined the future of night warfare. Charts turned into strategy. Doubt turned into doctrine. And the invisible lines on the radar screen became the backbone of a defense the enemy could neither see nor stop. By the time the morning sun broke fully over the horizon, the island had changed forever. Because last night, for the first time, everyone finally believed Major Carroll Smith. In the days that followed, the island seemed quieter. Not because the enemy had vanished, but because the men stationed there no longer felt blind. Radar masts rose along the ridges, cables stretched across operations rooms, and crews drilled through the night with a new sense of purpose. What had once been a curiosity, an experimental machine with blinking lights and strange hums, was now the difference between life and death. Major Carroll Smith moved through the station with a calm authority, no longer the eccentric outsider. Operators straightened when he entered. Junior officers asked for his judgment before making decisions. Commanders routed patrol strategies through his desk before signing orders. But he never acted like a man who had one. If anything, he carried himself like a man who understood exactly how close they had come to losing everything. One evening, a young radar operator approached him. Sir, the boy asked softly, do you think last night will happen again? Smith looked at the glowing radar screen. The silent circle that had once been dismissed, mocked, ignored. He remembered the first blip that night, how small it had looked, how enormous the consequences had been. There will always be another night, he said. Another attack. Another moment when someone has to decide whether to trust what they can't see. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. All we can do is be ready. The operator nodded, steeling himself, because readiness was now their armor. Word of Smith's stand spread far beyond the island. Reports went up the chain of command, and soon other bases began adjusting their nighttime defenses, studying the logs from that chaotic hour. Engineers upgraded equipment. Pilots adjusted interception tactics. Commanders revised protocols written by men who had never faced the kind of darkness Smith fought through. Radar, once a footnote, became one of the pillars of Allied victory in the air. As months passed, Smith would guide countless crews through incoming raids. Sometimes they stopped them before the first bomb fell. Sometimes the enemy slipped through, but never again because the warning came too late. And every time the radar screen crackled to life, Smith felt the weight of that night return. The searchlights, the explosions, the fear in the men's voices, the isolation of knowing he alone had seen the danger coming. But he also remembered the moment everything changed, when doubt gave way to trust. Standing outside the shack one final night, warm Pacific wind brushing past him, Smith watched the green sweep rotate across the screen and whispered to himself, "This is how we win." The Invisible War had found its champion. And thanks to Major Carroll Smith, the men who once feared the dark no longer faced it alone.